I was a starving drifter on her porch, and that night the widow called me her husband. The night was falling fast, painting the sky in streaks of gray and fading orange, and he walked along the empty road, dragging his tired feet through the dust. Despair. Each step felt heavier than the last. His stomach growled, reminding him sharply that it had been far too long since he had eaten. The sun had disappeared behind the hills, and the cold air was beginning to creep into his bones. His clothes were nothing more than rags, threadbare and patched, worn from weeks of wandering from town to town. People had learned to ignore him or turn away. He had learned to keep walking, to keep moving, to avoid trouble that would find him anyway. Pay.
He had no home. He had no family.
Only the open road and the shadows of the night were his companions. Sometimes he slept under a bridge, sometimes in abandoned barns, and sometimes just curled up in the grass, staring at the stars and wishing that things could be different. Each town he had passed offered him little more than fleeting kindness. A warm loaf of bread here, a hand-me-down coat there, but nothing that could stay. Nothing that would make him feel safe. Breath. Tonight, he had wandered farther than he had intended. The road stretched endlessly before him, lined with trees whose branches looked like the long fingers of ghosts reaching down to touch him. Day. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the whisper of the wind, made him flinch. He was hungry, cold, exhausted. And yet there was a strange pull that kept him walking forward, a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, he would find shelter, food, or even a friendly face. Hours had passed, and the last town he had passed seemed like a dream now, a place he had never truly belonged. He had watched people sit in their warm houses, laughing, eating, sharing their lives, and felt an ache so deep in his chest that it almost made him stumble. There was a part of him that wanted to scream at the unfairness of life, to demand why it had singled him out for suffering. But that voice was always quiet, drowned out by the hunger, the fatigue, and the loneliness that followed him like a shadow. As he trudged along the road, his eyes caught a soft glow in the distance. A small house sat quietly, its windows illuminated by the warm, golden light of lamps inside. Smoke curled from the chimney, curling into the night sky. For a moment, he stopped, mesmerized by the sight. It had been so long since he had felt warmth, since he had seen the welcoming light of a home. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he had almost forgotten. Hope. He slowed his steps, unsure if he should approach. Pride and fear battled inside him. Pride told him to keep moving, to not impose, to survive on his own. Fear warned him that people might see him, judge him, or throw him out. But hunger and exhaustion were stronger than both. He needed rest. He needed food. Grayson. And, more than anything, he needed kindness, even if just for a night.
He reached the porch and hesitated.
The wooden boards creaked under his weight as he stepped forward.
He was acutely aware of every sound, the wind brushing against the walls, the soft hum of life from within the house.
He rubbed his hands together, trying to warn them. His stomach growled again, louder this time, and he swallowed hard, hoping no one inside would hear. He sat down on the edge of the porch, unsure of what to do next. The warmth of the house seemed to call to him, a silent invitation that he didn't dare accept without permission. Memories of past rejections and harsh words echoed in his mind. People had called him lazy, a beggar, a worthless wanderer. He had heard it so many times that he almost believed it himself. But sitting there, watching the soft glow of life behind the glass, he dared to imagine something different, something better. Hours, or maybe minutes, he couldn't tell any more, passed. The house remained quiet, but the soft sound of movement from inside suggested someone was there. He thought of knocking, of asking politely for food or shelter. But what if they refused?
What if they scolded him? What if they were angry for even noticing him?
Desperate. The questions crowded his mind, each one heavier than the last. He pressed his forehead against his knees and closed his eyes, taking slow, deep breaths. He reminded himself that he had survived worse nights. He had faced storms, hunger, and fear. And yet here he was, still moving, still fighting. That thought gave him a small spark of strength. He could not give up, not yet. Bass. Not tonight. Finally, he lifted his head and looked at the door. Bay. His hand hovered near the edge of the porch, trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and, with the smallest of knocks, tapped on the door. The sound echoed, and he held his breath, waiting. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his body tense, ready to run if needed. Then the door opened. A woman stood there, looking at him with wide, curious eyes. She was older than him, but not old, strong, with a presence that felt gentle, yet firm. Her eyes softened as they met his. She didn't scold him. She didn't ask questions. She simply looked, really looked, at the young man on her porch. And in that moment he felt seen. Not as a drifter, not as a beggar, not as a failure, but as a human being. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised him. "Are you all right?" she asked. He wanted to lie, to say he was fine, but he couldn't. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. I'm hungry. I haven't eaten all day, Bet. I have nowhere to go tonight. Her face didn't change. Bay. She didn't turn him away. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. Brish. Then come in, she said simply. You can sit by the fire for a while. He hesitated, unsure if this was real or just another trick of hope playing cruel games on him. But the warmth from inside the house reached out to him like an embrace he had long forgotten. Slowly, carefully, he stepped over the threshold, leaving the cold porch behind. For the first time in days, he felt safe, even if just a little. Inside, the house smelled of bread and herbs, of something homey and comforting. A fire crackled in the hearth, sending waves of warmth across the room. He sat down in the chair she offered, trying not to tremble from the combination of cold, hunger, and relief. She handed him a plate with simple food: bread, cheese, and a bowl of soup. It wasn't a feast, but to him it was a treasure. As he ate, he noticed the small details around him. The neatness of the room, the soft light of the lamps, the quiet presence of someone who cared for her home and life. He realized how long it had been since he had felt this normal, this human. He had survived on scraps, slept under the stars, and walked roads no one else would take. But here, in this moment, he felt something he had almost forgotten: comfort. The woman watched him quietly, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and kindness. She didn't ask about his past. She didn't demand explanations. She simply let him be, letting him eat, letting him breathe, letting him exist without judgment. It was a strange, wonderful feeling for someone like him. Someone who had spent so long hiding from the world, hiding from people, hiding from himself. When the meal was finished, he sat back, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into his tired muscles. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or if this kindness would last beyond tonight, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a place where he could rest, even if only for a night. He didn't speak much after that. Words felt unnecessary. The quiet companionship, the shared silence, and the gentle presence of someone who had not turned him away were enough. And as the night deepened and the shadows of the storm outside seemed to settle, he felt the weight of the road ease slightly from his shoulders. Maybe the journey didn't have to be so lonely. Maybe there were still good people in the world. Desk sentences. That night, sitting by the fire on the porch of a house that could have been just another stranger's home, he felt something stir inside him, a small flicker of hope, fragile, but real. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand, something that would change his life forever. But in that moment, all he knew was warmth, safety, and a taste of kindness he had almost given up on finding. And for a drifter who had known nothing but hunger and wandering, that was enough to keep going. The fire crackled softly as he sat in the chair, still feeling the warmth seep slowly into his chilled bones. He had never experienced such kindness without strings attached. Most people, he thought, would have shooed him away or demanded an explanation he couldn't give. But she had not. She had simply allowed him to exist in her home, given him food, and offered him warmth. That was enough to start easing the weight in his chest. The widow, meanwhile, busied herself quietly in the kitchen. She moved with calm purpose, arranging dishes, wiping counters, and humming a soft tune that seemed familiar, like a song remembered from childhood. He watched her for a while, not out of curiosity, but because it was comforting to see life moving around him in a steady, predictable rhythm. Life in his world had always been chaotic, roads that never ended, nights that were colder than any winter, people who ignored or judged him. But here, everything felt simple, ordinary, and safe. Finally, she turned to him, offering a small smile. "Are you comfortable?" she asked gently. There was no judgment in her voice, only quiet concern. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. Comfort was a strange feeling for him. Most of his life, comfort had been something to fear. People had taken advantage of it, laughed at it, or pulled it away without warning. Yet, something about her presence made him want to say yes. He nodded slowly, managing a small smile of his own. Yes. Thank you. She nodded, and then asked, "You've been on the road for a long time, haven't you?" He looked down at his hands, the words heavy on his tongue. He had always avoided talking about his life, had always preferred to keep his story to himself, but something in her tone, in her eyes, made him feel safe enough to speak. "A long time, yes. I've been moving, just trying to get by. Some towns are better than others. Some people, they don't want you around." Her eyes softened. I can imagine. Life isn't always kind, is it? He shook his head slowly. No, it isn't. There was a pause. Then she poured herself a cup of tea and sat down across from him. She didn't push, didn't demand more of his story, but just let him speak when he felt ready. And he did. He told her about the towns he had passed through, the nights he had slept under bridges, and the days he had gone without food. He spoke quietly, almost as if admitting it out loud made it more real, more permanent. He spoke of the loneliness that followed him like a shadow, and the shame he sometimes felt for needing help. The words spilled slowly, hesitantly, but she listened, really listened, without interruption or judgment. In return, she shared her own story, though more cautiously. She spoke of her husband, of the years they had spent together, and the empty house that had felt colder after he passed. She didn't mention pain in a way that demanded sympathy. She only shared the truth of her life. And as she spoke, he noticed something in her eyes, a loneliness similar to his own, but shaped differently, by love lost instead of survival fought. They sat there, two people from completely different worlds, sharing pieces of themselves in the quiet warmth of her home. He realized that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone without fear or mistrust. Every word, every glance, every small smile from her made him feel slightly less invisible, slightly more human. As the night deepened, the storm outside began to rise. Rain pounded against the windows, and the wind rattled the doors. But inside they felt insulated, safe from the chaos outside. He found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, leaning back in the chair and letting the warmth of the fire and the presence of another person settle his restless mind. She noticed the way he flinched at the wind, and the way he pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself. "You've had a hard life, haven't you?" she said softly. He swallowed, unsure how to answer. Was it honesty or shame that made the words come out? Beck. "Yes, harder than most. But I've survived."
I always survive. She nodded, her expression tender.
Phew. That's good. You're strong then. Stronger than you think. Her words struck him unexpectedly. Most people had only ever pointed out his failures, his lack of possessions, his wandering. But she had noticed something different. Inspiration. Something in him that wasn't visible at first glance. Resilience. And for the first time in a long while he felt pride swelling quietly in his chest. They spent hours talking that night. Not about grand things, but small, human things. About meals, the weather, the way people sometimes do kind things without expecting anything in return. About simple joys, the kind he had almost forgotten to notice. With every passing moment he felt a connection growing, fragile but undeniable, like the first fragile leaves of spring after a long winter. At some point he realized he had stopped thinking about the road. He hadn't planned to stay long. He had only sought shelter from the cold and a meal to quiet his hunger. But now, sitting in her presence, he didn't want to leave. Not yet. He felt drawn to her warmth, her calm, her acceptance. There was a trust forming, quiet and slow, but real, and it frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. She, too, seemed aware of the bond forming. Her movements were gentle when she passed him a blanket or refilled his tea. Her eyes lingered just a little longer when he spoke. She smiled when he laughed at a small joke, a laugh that had been missing from both their lives for far too long. There was no rush, no pressure, just quiet companionship, and it was enough to heal pieces of their hearts that neither had realized were broken. As the night wore on, he began to feel a strange sense of belonging. The idea of leaving the next morning no longer seemed urgent. A road that had always defined him, that had been his identity, no longer felt like the only option. Here, in this warm, quiet home, he felt a strange peace, a feeling he hadn't known in years. And yet, beneath the comfort, a small fear lingered. He wasn't sure he deserved this kindness. He wasn't sure he could trust it to last beyond this night. Old habits die slowly, and he had spent so long surviving alone that the thought of depending on someone else felt foreign, almost dangerous. But as he watched her move around the room, humming softly and smiling occasionally in his direction, he realized that maybe he could try. Maybe he could let someone care for him, even if just for a little while. Eventually, fatigue overtook him. He had been walking all day, thinking all week, surviving all month, and his body demanded rest. She guided him to a small guest room, simple but warm, with a bed that felt like heaven after weeks of sleeping on the hard ground. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if he was allowed to accept such comfort, but she only smiled gently and left him to settle in. As he lay down, he felt the fire's warmth fading softly in the other room, and the sound of rain pattering against the windows became a lullaby. He thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought him here, a starving drifter knocking on a widow's door, and wondered if life could indeed change so quickly. He realized he had felt welcomed, understood, and safe for the first time in what seemed like forever. Sleep came slowly, but it came nonetheless, and in the quiet hours of the night, he dreamed, not of roads, not of hunger, not of survival, but of warmth, laughter, and a home that was not his own but had made him feel like he belonged. It was a dream of trust, of kindness, and of connection, fragile as it was, but more real than anything he had known in years. By the time he woke, he didn't yet know what tomorrow would bring. The road might still call him, and his past might still chase him. But for now he had this night, this home, this woman who had seen him and welcomed him without question, Bay. And that, he realized, was a beginning that he had never allowed himself to hope for, and a beginning that would slowly, in ways he couldn't yet imagine, change everything. The next morning he woke to the gentle sound of sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The warmth of the bed, the quiet hum of life outside, and the distant aroma of breakfast made him pause.
He had spent so long sleeping wherever he could, so long waking up to uncertainty and hunger, that this calm felt almost unreal.
Bay. He sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the peace of the room, and tried to steady his racing thoughts. Downstairs, he could hear the soft clatter of dishes and the occasional hum of a tune. The widow was already moving about, preparing breakfast as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. And yet, everything had changed. The simple act of opening her door to him, letting him in, giving him food and warmth, it had shifted something inside him. He felt, for the first time in years, that he might belong somewhere, even if only for a little while. Best. When he came down, she greeted him with a kind smile. "Good morning," she said. "Bay. Sleep well." He nodded, still little unsure of what to say. Words felt heavy when they carried so much meaning. "Yes, thank you," he murmured. Breakfast was quiet at first. They shared food without much conversation, letting the calm of the morning settle around them. But eventually he found himself speaking, tentatively at first, about the little things he had noticed in the house, the neat arrangement of the furniture, the small garden outside, the way the light hit the floor just right in the early morning. He spoke with an almost childlike fascination, as if rediscovering a world he had long abandoned. She listened, nodding gently, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "It's nice to notice small things," she said. "They remind us that life is not always harsh, that beauty can be found even in ordinary moments." He thought about that, and for a moment, he allowed himself to believe it. For so long, his life had been about surviving, about avoiding danger and hunger, about keeping moving so no one could hurt him. Bandis. He had forgotten how to stop, how to notice, how to feel. And now, sitting across from her, he began to remember. But the peace of the morning was fragile. As he drank his tea, he heard the faint sound of voices from outside the house.
Curious, he went to the window and peered out. A group of men were gathered near the edge of the property, talking and laughing loudly.
Breath. Their tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of suspicion in the way they looked at the house. He felt a familiar tension rise in his chest, a tension he knew too well. The widow noticed his unease and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
It's all right, she said softly.
They're just neighbors. They mean no harm. But he knew better. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. People could smile while hiding ill intentions. He had spent years reading the slightest hints of danger in the eyes of strangers. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a warning he couldn't ignore. Bury. Still, he didn't want to alarm her. She had already shown him so much kindness, and he didn't want to shatter the fragile peace they had created. He took a deep breath and returned to the breakfast table, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. The day passed slowly, filled with quiet moments and small tasks, breaths. He helped her in the garden, pulling weeds and tending to the plants. He washed dishes, swept floors, and did the little chores that made the house feel alive. With each task, he felt a growing sense of connection, not just to the house, but to her. Her presence was steady, comforting, and somehow made the work feel less like labor and more like purpose. But as evening approached, the tension outside the house returned. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sounds of the town with it. He could feel the unease creeping back into his mind, the old instincts of survival resurfacing. He glanced at her, worried she might sense his anxiety. She did, and she gave him a reassuring smile. "You don't need to worry," she said. "You're safe here." He wanted to believe her. He truly did. But the years of wandering, of being on the road, of facing hunger and danger alone, had left deep marks on him. Safety felt foreign. Trust felt fragile. And yet something inside him told him to stay, to try, to believe, even if just for tonight. As night fell, the storm outside grew stronger. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees. The house creaked under the force of the storm, and he felt a flicker of fear. He had faced storms before, but never in the comfort of a home, never with someone who cared about him watching over him. It was a strange, conflicting feeling, fear mixed with warmth, danger mixed with comfort. The widow noticed his tension and moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she whispered. "The storm will pass. We'll be fine."
Her words were simple, but they carried a weight he hadn't expected.
In that moment, he realized how much he needed her presence, how much he needed someone to remind him that he didn't have to face the world alone. He felt a tear slip down his cheek, not out of sadness, but out of relief, out of gratitude, out of a strange, overwhelming emotion he hadn't named before. The storm raged outside, but inside they sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and silence. He told her about the worst nights on the road, the hunger, the cold, the fear. She listened, never judging, never pitying, just understanding. And in turn, she shared memories of her husband, of the life they had built together, of the love and loss she had carried quietly. It was during these quiet moments that something shifted. He began to see her not just as a kind stranger, but as someone who could understand him, who could see him, who could care for him in ways no one else had. And she began to see him not just as a wandering drifter, but as a human being capable of kindness, honesty, and resilience. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to calm. The rain softened, and the wind subsided. But the storm inside him, the storm of doubt, fear, and loneliness, still lingered. But he didn't know if he could trust this feeling, this connection, this warmth. But he wanted to. More than he had wanted anything in a long time, he wanted to believe that he could stay, that he could belong, that he could be more than a wandering shadow on the road. As the night deepened, they found themselves sitting closer together by the fire. The flickering light cast gentle shadows across the room. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace he had never known.
He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he felt, but the words caught in his throat.
Fear and hope wrestled inside him, leaving him silent yet deeply connected to her presence. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You've been through so much," she said, "but you're here now. You're safe. You're not alone." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. They were simple, yet they carried a truth he had almost forgotten. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to believe that he might not have to face the world alone anymore, that he could trust someone, that he could belong somewhere. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and the occasional silence that spoke louder than words. He realized that this night, this moment, was different from any other he had experienced. It was not about survival, not about hunger, not about wandering. It was about connection, about trust, about the fragile beginnings of something real and human. And in the quiet hours before sleep, as the storm finally passed and the world outside settled into calm, he felt a flicker of something new, a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that tomorrow might be different. Hope that he could stay. Hope that this connection, this kindness, might grow into something lasting. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, not of roads and wandering, but of warmth, safety, and a home where he could belong. The morning after the storm was calm and bright. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the house into a warm, golden haven. Outside, the world was fresh and clean. The rain had washed the dust from the trees, and the air smelled crisp and new. Inside, however, a quiet tension lingered. Neither of them had spoken of what had happened the night before, yet both felt the change. Something had shifted between them, something neither could ignore. He sat at the table, sipping the warm tea she had prepared, feeling the comfort of her home settle around him like a soft blanket. He was not used to stillness. He was not used to being welcomed without suspicion or fear. Yet here he was, sitting in a home where he felt safe, with someone who had already given him more kindness than he had experienced in years. She moved around the kitchen, arranging breakfast, humming softly, but he noticed the little glances she cast his way. Each glance held a curiosity and an unspoken question, as if she, too, was testing the waters of this new, fragile connection. Bess. He felt his heart tighten. He didn't know what to say, didn't know if he could put into words the emotions swirling inside him. Gratitude, relief, but caught confusion, and a growing warmth he could not yet name. After breakfast, they decided to sit together in the living room. The fire had long died down, but the sunlight filled the room with warmth. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the gentle rhythm of each other's presence. But the silence could not last forever. Words, unspoken yet pressing, hung in the air between them. Finally, she spoke. "You stayed through the storm last night," she said softly. "I didn't have to let you, but I'm glad I did." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. Gratitude and shame battled inside him. Gratitude for her kindness. Shame because he had nothing to offer in return. I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "I've never..."
"Have you been enacting Diamond?" asked Charlotte, just as he was over. Asked in wrapping the deem.
"Just be," Here. That's enough. He nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest. She wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't judging. She was simply letting him exist, letting him belong. It was a foreign but comforting feeling, one that he wanted to hold on to even if he didn't fully understand it. As the day progressed, they moved about the house, completing small tasks together. He helped her with chores, tidying up, washing dishes, and organizing the shelves. With each task, he felt a subtle shift inside himself. For the first time in years, he was not merely surviving. He was contributing, helping, being part of a life that was not just his own. And she noticed. She offered quiet encouragements, gentle smiles, and small gestures of appreciation that made him feel valued in ways he had long forgotten. In the afternoon, they sat together in the garden, watching the soft sway of the trees in the breeze. The world felt peaceful, almost suspended in time. He wanted to speak, to say something that could explain all that he felt, but words seemed inadequate. How could he convey the gratitude, the relief, the hope, and the longing he had carried for so long? He remained quiet, letting the garden's calm absorb his restless thoughts. She noticed his silence and reached out, touching his hand gently. The contact was brief, yet it sent a shiver through him. Not from fear, but from the realization that someone could care for him so simply, so naturally. Her touch was not demanding or expectant. It was just acknowledgement, acceptance, connection. You don't have to be afraid, she said softly, her eyes meeting his. I know your life has been hard. I see it. And I don't want to let you go. He had wandered for so long, always expecting rejection, always expecting to be turned away. And now here was someone offering him a place in her life, offering him a bond he had never dared to hope for. Fear and hope collided inside him. Could he trust this? Bas, could he allow himself to belong? As evening approached, the sky painted itself in shades of orange and pink, and the world outside seemed to pause in quiet beauty. They moved back inside, sitting by the fire that she had rekindled. The warmth of the flames mirrored the warmth building between them. He could feel it in the small ways she looked at him, in the gentle gestures, in the quiet moments of shared laughter. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke words that would change everything. Desperate. I want you to stay, she said, her voice firm yet tender. Not just tonight, not just for a while. Stay. Be here with me. Be my husband. He froze. The words struck him like a bolt of lightning, leaving him speechless. He had wandered through life expecting nothing, believing he was undeserving of kindness, let alone love. And yet, here was someone offering him not just shelter or food, but a place in her heart, a bond that was both terrifying and beautiful. He wanted to speak, to refuse, to say that he was not worthy, that he had nothing to offer, that he was too broken for such a life. But the truth was he didn't want to refuse. Something inside him stirred. Hope, longing, and a fragile trust he had never allowed himself to feel. I don't know what to say, he whispered, his voice trembling. Then don't say anything, she replied, smiling softly. Just feel it. Let yourself believe that you can be part of this. Part of me. The words washed over him, breaking down walls he had built over years of wandering and surviving alone. For so long he had believed that he was unworthy, that he had no place in the world, that kindness and love were things meant for others, not him. And yet, here she was, offering him exactly that. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, both aware of the gravity of the moment. He felt a rush of emotions, fear, gratitude, disbelief, and hope, all mingling in his chest. Bah. She reached out again, gently taking his hand in hers. The touch was steady, grounding, and it carried a promise he had never known he needed.
I want you to trust me, she said softly. I want you to know that you're safe.
You don't have to face the world alone anymore. Back. He nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill over.
Trust was not easy for him. It had taken years to learn how to survive without depending on anyone, to protect himself from disappointment and pain. But now the thought of being alone again felt unbearable. The warmth in her eyes, the steady strength in her voice, and the simple kindness she had shown him made him realize that he could allow himself to trust, to belong, to hope. Bet. For the first time in his life, he felt the possibility of something more than survival. He felt the possibility of home, of companionship, of love. And in that moment he made a silent promise to himself. To try, to stay, to embrace this chance for connection and belonging. The night deepened, and they sat together, talking quietly, sharing their stories, their fears, and their hopes. The world outside had faded away, leaving only the two of them in the warmth of the fire and the comfort of shared understanding.
Every glance, every touch, every word strengthened the bond between them.
And as sleep approached, he realized something profound. He had wandered for so long, lost and alone, searching for something he could not name. And now, in the quiet of this home, with a woman who had shown him kindness, understanding, and love, he had found it. Not just a place to rest, not just a meal to eat, but a life worth living, a heart to belong to, and a hope that he had almost given up on. That night, as he lay in the small guest room she had prepared, he didn't feel the weight of the road pressing down on him. He didn't feel the hunger that had driven him across towns and fields. He felt something new, a sense of safety, a spark of trust, and a fragile but real love that promised a beginning he had never imagined. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, and allowed himself to believe that he could stay, that he could be more than a wandering soul, that he could be part of a life filled with warmth, care, and connection. And for the first time in years, he slept peacefully, wrapped not only in blankets, but in the hope of a future he had never dared to dream of. The morning light streamed gently through the window, soft and warm, casting golden patterns across the room. He woke slowly, feeling a strange, comforting sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in his life, he did not wake to the harsh reality of survival. He did not wake to the emptiness of the road, or the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He woke to the quiet sounds of a home that was alive, a home that welcomed him, and a presence that made him feel safe. He moved carefully down the stairs, not wanting to disturb her, though he knew she was already awake. The aroma of freshly baked bread and herbs filled the air, mingling with the crisp scent of morning. She smiled softly at him as he entered the kitchen. There was no need for words. Her calm gaze, the warmth in her eyes, and the quiet gestures of daily life spoke more than words ever could.
Good morning, she said softly, handing him a cup of warm tea.
Good morning, he replied, his voice still tinged with disbelief, awe, and a quiet gratitude. He had wandered for so long, thinking that no one could ever care for him, and yet here he was, welcomed, valued, even loved. The thought still made his chest tighten, but in a way that was no longer painful. It was comforting. It is hopeful.
The days that followed passed with a rhythm he had never known.
The road that had defined his life for so long became a distant memory. He helped her with daily chores, feeding the chickens, tending the small garden, washing dishes, and mending fences. Bay. Each task, simple as it seemed, felt meaningful. It was not just labor, it was contribution, purpose, and connection. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was part of a life bigger than just himself. She, too, found comfort in his presence, breath. The house, once quiet and lonely, now carried laughter, conversation, and the quiet warmth of companionship. She no longer felt the heavy ache of loss that had haunted her since her husband passed. She still remembered him, and the love they shared would never fade, but the drifter's presence brought a new kind of hope, a reminder that life could continue, that love could be found again, even in unexpected ways. Over time, the bond between them deepened. It was not rushed or forced. It grew naturally, quietly, like the soft unfolding of flowers in spring. They shared stories, small jokes, quiet moments of understanding, and even moments of frustration when the challenges of daily life arose. But each moment, no matter how small, strengthened the connection between them. He began to understand that life did not have to be a constant struggle. Bet. He could rest. He could trust. He could love and be loved. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, she paused and looked at him with a gentle seriousness. "Do you know," she said softly, "that you've changed my life too?" He paused, wiping his hands on his pants. "Me?" he asked, surprised.
"Yes," she said, smiling. "Before you came here, the house was quiet. Too quiet."
Narration. I lived in the past, holding on to memories that were beautiful but made me lonely. You've reminded me that life can still be full of hope, laughter, and care. You've brought warmth back into this home and into my heart. His chest tightened at her words. He had spent so long feeling like nothing mattered, like no one could ever notice him, like he had no place in the world. And now she had told him that his presence mattered, that he had made a difference, that he had brought joy and life back into someone else's world. It was almost too much to believe, but the truth of it warmed him in a way he could not describe. Evenings became their favorite time of day. Beth. After the chores were done, they would sit together by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. He learned to appreciate the small joys, the crackle of the fire, the softness of a blanket, the way sunlight streamed through the windows, and the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. Each moment felt precious because he had lived so long without them, and each moment reminded him that life could be more than survival. It could be love. It could be connection. It could be home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, she reached out and took his hand. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that you are part of this family now. You don't have to wander anymore. You belong here." His eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude.
He had never expected this.
Never imagined that someone could see him, truly see him, and welcome him so fully. I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There."
"You don't have to say anything," she replied, squeezing his hand gently. "Just stay."
"That's all I need." He realized then that he wanted to stay, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because he had finally found something worth holding on to. He wanted to stay because he had found a home, because he had found trust, because he had found love. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that life could be good, that he could be happy, and that he could be more than the wandering drifter he had once been. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. He settled into the rhythm of the home, finding joy in the simple routines and in the quiet companionship of the woman who had welcomed him. Ask, He laughed more freely than he had in years, slept more peacefully, and even began to dream again, not of the road, but of a future that included love, stability, and purpose. She too flourished with his presence. The house was no longer a place of quiet memories, but of life, laughter, and shared hope. Together they created a home where both could heal, grow, and find comfort in one another. The small acts of kindness, the shared meals, and the gentle conversations built a foundation that was stronger than either of them had imagined possible. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, she leaned against him and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying."
He smiled, feeling the warmth of her words wrap around him like a protective cloak. "Thank you for letting me," he replied.
They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors, the world slowing down around them. And in that silence he understood something profound. Life had brought him here for a reason. All the years of wandering, all the nights of hunger, all the moments of fear and loneliness, they had led him to this home, to this woman, to this life. And for the first time, he felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The seasons changed, and with them, their life together deepened. They celebrated small victories, tended the garden, shared stories, and found comfort in each other's presence. The house, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with laughter, warmth, and the soft hum of love. And though the past could never be erased, it no longer defined him. He had found a place to rest, a heart to care for, and a life worth living. In the quiet moments, he sometimes thought back to the road, to the nights of hunger and fear, to the endless wandering, and he realized something important. Those hardships had shaped him, made him resilient, and made him appreciate the kindness and love he had found. But they no longer controlled him. He was no longer a drifter. He was part of a home. He was part of a life. He was part of a heart that had chosen to trust him. And in that choice, in that simple act of being welcomed and loved, he had discovered something even more powerful than survival. He had discovered belonging. Years later, he would look back on that night, the night he had knocked on her porch exhausted, starving, and alone, and realize that it had changed his life forever.
One act of kindness, one invitation to stay, and open the door to a new beginning, a new family, and a new way of being.
It had shown him that even the most wandering soul could find home, that even the most broken heart could be healed, and that love could arrive in the most unexpected of ways. He no longer walked the roads alone. He no longer slept under bridges or wondered if anyone would care. He had found safety, warmth, love, and a home. And every day, as he sat by the fire, helped in the garden, or shared a quiet laugh with her, he remembered that first night. The night that had started it all. And he was grateful, endlessly grateful, for the chance to belong. And in that belonging, he finally found peace.